Mom changed the locks, so I changed the deeds. It sounds cold, transactional, perhaps even cruel. But to understand the second act, you must first witness the first. You must stand with me in the venomous, sleeting rain of a New England October, the kind of rain that doesn't just get you wet, but seems to want to dissolve you, to erase you from the landscape. You must feel the useless and ice-cold key in my hand, a relic of a life I'd foolishly believed was still mine to access. I had driven for 8 hours, fueled by a cautious optimism that was, in hindsight, embarrassingly naive, a decade away building a career, a life, and a name for myself, Jordan Smith. A structural engineer who could make concrete and steel bend to his will had softened the sharp edges of my memory. I'd let myself believe that time, distance, and my own success might have changed her, that Margaret Smith might have finally tired of her lonely reign. But queens do not tire of their thrones, even when the kingdom is just a 2-story colonial in suburban Connecticut, and the subjects have all fled. The key didn't just fail to turn, it was brutally rejected. A hard, metallic stop that jarred my entire arm. It was a physical manifestation of a psychological truth I had spent my life avoiding. My gaze fell upon the lock set, the familiar, tarnished brass my father had installed, a lock whose gentle click had welcomed me home from school, from dates, from college, was gone. In its place was a gleaming, polished nickel deadbolt, a silver scar on the face of the old oak door. It was a monument to my exile, cold, perfect, and utterly impersonal. It was a language my mother spoke fluently, the language of locked doors, silent phones, and erased histories. Through the window to the right of the door, the one where my father and I once spent a snow day mapping out constellations with a telescope, a warm golden light spilled out into the deepening twilight. It was the light of home. A fire was likely crackling in the hearth. And then a shadow passed across the light. Her silhouette. Oblivious. No, never her. She was performing domesticity, a pantomime of warmth and welcome for an audience of one, standing outside in the cold. She knew I was coming. This wasn't an oversight. It was an ambush. A white-hot chemical fire ignited in my gut. Not the slow burn of resentment, but the flashbang of pure, undiluted rage. Every strained phone call, every holiday invitation I'd extended that was met with a clipped, dismissive excuse, every subtle jab at my independence, it all coalesced into this one, perfect act of repudiation. She hadn't just locked a door. She had taken the sum of my entire childhood, the scraped knees, the report cards on the fridge, the pencil marks on the door frame tracking my height, and declared it null and void. I was a tenant whose lease had expired. I could have exploded. I could have put my boot through the lower panel of that door. I could have picked up one of the heavy river stones from her meticulously maintained garden and sent it crashing through the pristine glass of the living room window, shattering her performance of peace. The animal part of my brain screamed for it. Let her see your fury. Let her deal with the mess. But then, my father's voice, a calm and steady echo in the storm of my own anger, surfaced. Don't fight angry. Jordan, he used to tell me, tapping a blueprint on his desk. Angry people make mistakes. They focus on the wall, not the foundation. True power isn't in kicking down a door, it's in owning the building. He was an engineer. He built bridges designed to withstand hurricanes, foundations meant to last for centuries. He understood that the most powerful forces are the ones you can't see: tension, compression, leverage. My mother's power was in the visible, the dramatic, the emotional blast radius. It was loud and hot, but it was brittle. My father's power was in the quiet, patient, and relentless application of structural logic. Standing there, soaked to the bone. I felt a profound and terrifying shift inside me. The heat of my rage didn't vanish. It was transmuted. It cooled, hardened, and was forged into the cold. Sharp certainty of a steel beam being locked into place. The emotional storm subsided, and in its wake was a quiet, crystalline clarity. This was not my home anymore. She had made that clear. So be it. You cannot be locked out of a place you own. You cannot be evicted by a tenant. The war she had just declared would not be fought on her terms, with shouting matches and broken china. It would be fought on mine, on legal paper, in county records offices, and with the quiet, devastating precision of a pen signing a contract. She thought the lock on the front door was the ultimate symbol of her power. She had no idea I was about to claim the ground the house was built on. I didn't drive far, just a few miles down the road to a Marriott Courtyard, a place so perfectly anonymous it felt like a sanctuary. The beige walls and generic corporate art were a balm to my raw nerves. In that sterile room, there were no memories to ambush me, no ghosts in the hallways. I dropped my duffel bag on the floor and tossed the useless brass key onto the nightstand. It landed with a soft, pathetic clink, a tiny monument to my own foolishness. My mother, Margaret, didn't see people. She saw assets and liabilities. Her love was a form of accounting, a ledger of debts and credits she kept meticulously in her head. I was her greatest asset, her only child. My father, Richard Smith, had been the bedrock of her world, and when he died of a sudden heart attack 5 years ago, the ground gave way beneath her. But instead of grieving, she consolidated. She doubled down on the one asset she had left me. My father was different. He was the quiet force that gave our family its structure, a brilliant civil engineer. He saw the world in terms of loads and supports, tensions and compressions. He understood that a family, like a bridge, needed flexibility to withstand pressure. He was the calm, rational support beam. While my mother was the unpredictable, gale force wind. For years, he absorbed her emotional tempests, grounding her, containing her. He was my shield. When I was a teenager and wanted to join a travel soccer team, she saw it as a betrayal of our Sunday family dinners. He's choosing strangers over his mother, she'd declared. My father had simply sat her down with a schedule and a map. Margaret, he'd said calmly, the boy is building his own life. Our job is to be his foundation, not his cage. He always won those arguments, not by shouting, but by being immovably reasonable. When he died, the foundation was gone, and the cage door slammed shut. I was 22, just finishing my degree. Her grief manifested as a desperate, suffocating need for control. She called constantly. She'd question my career choice moving to Boston, for a top firm was abandoning her. She'd critique my relationships, my finances, my apartment. Every step I took toward independence was, in her eyes, a step away from her. Our phone calls became a minefield of passive aggression and emotional blackmail. I'm just so alone here in this big house. She'd sigh, a statement designed to be a gilded dagger of guilt. I tried. God, I tried. I flew home for holidays, sent gifts, called every Sunday. But it was never enough, because what she wanted wasn't my love or my attention. She wanted my compliance. She wanted me to move back to Hartford, to take a safe local job, to slide back into the role of the dutiful son, her primary asset. My refusal was the ultimate act of defiance. It was a rejection of her ownership. The locks on the door were just the final formal notice of foreclosure. She was repossessing the life she felt I owed her. Starting with the house, sitting on the edge of the stiff hotel bed, the image of that new silver lock burned in my mind. And then my father's voice, A memory so clear it was almost a whisper in the room. I was 16, and he was showing me the portfolio of properties and investments he managed. It wasn't just our house, but a few commercial lots, a small apartment building downtown, and a portfolio of stocks. It was his legacy. "Look here, Jordan," he'd said, tapping a thick sheaf of legal documents. It was the charter for an LLC Smith Family Holdings. His name was listed as managing member. My mother was a member, and so was I. "You're a legal adult now. You need to understand this. A structure is only as strong as its governing documents." I'd been bored then, more interested in getting my driver's license. But I remembered his earnestness. "Your mother, she's a wonderful woman, but her heart rules her head. Business is not about heart. It's about rules. This LLC has rules, very specific rules about transfers, about control, about what happens if one of us is no longer here." He was planning. The engineer, the architect of our lives, was building a failsafe. He knew her. He knew that one day the wind might blow without a support beam to stop it. He had built one into the legal framework of our family's wealth. A jolt went through me, an electric current of understanding that chased away the cold dread. I hadn't just been excommunicated, I had been challenged. My mother was playing checkers, moving her pieces dramatically across the board. My father had taught me to play chess. I pulled my laptop from my bag, the keyboard clicking loudly in the silent room. I didn't search for lawyers. I didn't search for therapists. I logged into the Connecticut Secretary of State's business portal. I typed in the name I hadn't thought of in a decade, Smith Family Holdings. LLC. The record appeared instantly. Active, current. I clicked on the filing history, my heart pounding a steady, rhythmic beat. And there it was. A document filed 5 years ago, a week after my father's funeral. An amendment to Certificate of Organization. My father, with his engineer's foresight, had laid out the line of succession. His role as managing member wasn't to pass to my mother. It was to pass to me. According to the document, a document I was certain she had never read, I was already in charge. She just didn't know it yet. She had the keys to the front door, but I had the keys to the entire kingdom. The first phone call came the next morning, as I was sitting in a corner booth of a diner, nursing a black coffee and staring at a printed copy of the LLC's operating agreement. The document was dense, a testament to my father's meticulous, almost paranoid, foresight. It was a fortress of clauses and subclauses. Her name flashed on my phone screen. "Mom!" The word seemed absurd now. I let it ring, watching the screen pulse with a false sense of urgency. It went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text message. "Where are you? I expected you yesterday." The audacity was breathtaking. Not, "Did you arrive safely?" Not, "I'm sorry you couldn't get in." Just a cold, accusatory demand. She was probing, testing the waters, establishing her narrative of the wronged party. I typed a simple, sterile reply. "Arrived yesterday. Your new locks are very secure." I hit send and turned my phone face down on the table, the small vibration of her immediate reply buzzing against the formica. I didn't need to read it. I knew its contents would be a cocktail of feigned ignorance, wounded pride, and a demand that I call her immediately. I ignored it. Silence, as my father taught me, can be a powerful tool of negotiation. It forces the other party to reveal their position. My focus was on the papers in front of me. The operating agreement was my blueprint. It gave the managing member me sweeping powers, the power to buy and sell assets, to manage funds, to make capital calls, and, most critically, to amend the agreement itself with a simple majority vote. The members were my mother and me. A simple majority. My father had handed me a loaded weapon for 5 years. I'd had no idea I was carrying it. My first move was quiet, digital, and utterly invisible to her. I spent the day at a public library, using their computers. I drafted an amendment to the operating agreement, a simple one clarifying the powers of the managing member in even more explicit terms, removing any possible ambiguity. I signed it, scanned it, and filed it online with the Secretary of State. It was a matter of public record, but one she would never think to check. Next, I accessed the bank accounts for Smith Family Holdings, LLC. It took a certified copy of my father's death certificate, the LLC's formation documents, and a tense, hour-long video call with a fraud prevention specialist at the bank. But by the end of the day, I had full, exclusive online access. The balance was substantial. My father had been a prudent man. My mother had clearly been using the account for her living expenses, but she'd been drawing from the interest, barely touching the principal. She saw it as a bottomless trust fund, not a business to be managed. Then came the escalation. It arrived 2 days later, not as a phone call, but as an email from a lawyer. His name was Arthur Vance, a local attorney who specialized in family disputes. The email was polite, but the language was coiled like a snake. Dear Mr. Smith, I am writing on behalf of your mother, Margaret Smith. She has informed me that you have recently returned to Hartford and have been unreachable. She is deeply concerned for your well-being, but also for the security of the family estate. As you are aware, since your father's passing, she has been the sole steward of the family's assets. Given your prolonged absence and sudden, erratic behavior, she feels it is prudent to formalize her position. We have prepared documents to transfer your minority interest in Smith Family Holdings, LLC, to her in exchange for a generous one-time payout. This will free you from any unwanted responsibilities and allow your mother the peace of mind she deserves. I leaned back in my hotel chair, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. It was perfect. She wasn't just trying to lock me out of the house, she was trying to legally erase me from the family. She was using her grief and my erratic behavior, not answering her calls, as a pretext to seize total control. The generous payout was the masterstroke, painting her as magnanimous while she performed a daylight robbery. She had overplayed her hand so spectacularly, so arrogantly, that she had handed me the moral and legal high ground on a silver platter. She thought she was the sole steward. She had no idea she was just a tenant in a building I owned. This email wasn't just a threat. It was a confession of her intent, and a confession of her ignorance. The engineer in me took over. A problem had been presented. I needed to design a solution. Her attack was based on a false premise that she was in charge. My countermove couldn't be a simple refutation. It had to be a complete restructuring of the situation, so decisive that it would render her attack, and any future attacks, impossible. I spent the next 48 hours in a blur of focused activity. I wasn't just playing defense anymore. I was building. I contacted a commercial real estate broker. I had the LLC's properties appraised. I opened a new business checking account under my sole authority. I began drafting a series of transactions, legal, ethical, and perfectly aligned with the powers granted to me in the operating agreement my father had written. She wanted to formalize her position. Fine, I would formalize mine. She wanted to talk about the family estate. Excellent. Let's talk about every single piece of it. She thought she was the queen. She was about to find out she was a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. The lawyer's email wasn't an escalation. It was an invitation. An invitation to bring the entire structure down and rebuild it exactly as I saw fit. Before executing a single transaction, I needed to see the assets. An engineer doesn't design a retrofit based on old blueprints alone. He does a site visit. My first stop was a 3-story red brick apartment building on the less fashionable side of downtown Hartford. The Gables. According to a small, tarnished brass plaque by the entrance, it was one of the first properties my father had bought. A fixer-upper he'd poured his weekends into for years. The moment I stepped into the lobby, the smell hit me, a unique combination of old wood, Murphy oil soap, and something vaguely floral from a tenant's air freshener. It was the smell of my father's weekends. I ran my hand along the oak banister, its surface worn smooth and dark with age. I could almost feel the phantom vibration of his belt sander. He'd loved this place, not just as an investment, but as a project, a structure he could save. An old man with a cloud of white hair and a custodian's jumpsuit was polishing the brass mailboxes. He looked up, squinting. "Can I help you? I'm just looking around." I said, "My father used to own this building." "Richard Smith." The man's face broke into a warm, crinkled smile. "Ricky's boy." "Good Lord, You're Jordan." "I'm Frank Henderson. I've been the super here for 30 years. He wiped his hand on his pants before offering it. His grip was firm. "You look just like him. Same eyes. Haven't seen you since you were a teenager, kicking a soccer ball against the garage wall out back." The unexpected warmth of the memory caught me off guard. "Mr. Henderson, it's good to see you. Your father was a good man," he said, his voice lowering with reverence. "A real gentleman, not like these corporate landlords. When my wife was sick, he told me not to worry about the rent for a few months. Just focus on what's important," he said. After he passed, well, your mother's check's always cleared, but she never once set foot in the place. Just sends letters, cold ones. He shook his head slowly. "This building, it misses him." His words struck a chord deep inside me. A place I had carefully cordoned off with legal documents and cold fury. We talked for another 20 minutes. He told me about the leaky pipe in 2B, the flickering fluorescent in the laundry room, the family in 3A who just had a new baby. He spoke of the building not as a collection of units, but as a community my father had nurtured. I thanked him and made my way back to my rental car, the professional detachment I had so carefully constructed beginning to fracture. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the brick facade of the gables, and the dam broke. A wave of grief, raw and profound, washed over me. It wasn't the sharp, immediate grief of the funeral. It was the hollow, aching grief of realizing the true scope of what had been lost. Not just a father, but a world view, a way of being. My father built things. He fixed things. He cared. And what was I doing? I was moving money, drafting amendments, preparing a legal assault. I was using his tools, the LLC, the assets not to build, but to dismantle, to punish. The thought was nauseating. In my quest to fight my mother's brand of cruelty, was I simply adopting my own colder, more efficient, perhaps, but just as brutal? The image of that polished nickel lock on the front door swam in my vision, and for the first time, it wasn't just a symbol of her betrayal, but a reflection of the man I was becoming, someone who locks people out. My meticulously constructed plan suddenly felt hollow, a monument to my own pain. The victory I envisioned presenting her with the new deeds, watching the realization dawn on her face, felt sour and empty. It wasn't justice. It was just winning. And winning for its own sake was her game, not mine, not my father's. For a long moment, I considered just walking away, let her have the house, the money, the hollow victory. I could go back to Boston, to my own life, and leave the ghosts of Hartford behind for good. I could be free. But then I thought of Frank Henderson. I thought of the family in 3A with their new baby. I thought of the building itself, a living entity that missed its caretaker. My father hadn't just left behind a portfolio of assets. He had left behind a set of responsibilities. He had structured his will and his company not just to protect his wealth, but to protect his work, to protect his legacy of stewardship from my mother's emotional chaos and neglect. The LLC wasn't a weapon he had left me. It was a shield and a trust. The crisis passed, the emotional storm subsided, and in its place was not the cold resolve of an angry son, but the steady, quiet determination of an heir. My purpose clarified. forged anew in that moment of grief and doubt. This was no longer about revenge, Revenge was my mother's territory. This was about restoration. It was about assuming my rightful place, not to hoard power, but to wield it as my father had, with purpose, with care, and with an eye toward building things that last. My plan was still valid. The transactions were still necessary. But the intent behind them had fundamentally changed. I wasn't going to war to burn her kingdom to the ground. I was staging a coup to save it from a ruler who would let it fall into ruin. I started the car, my hands steady on the wheel. The next moves would be just as ruthless, just as clinical. But now, I knew why. I wasn't just changing the deeds, I was honoring a legacy. The meeting was set for a neutral location, the conference room of a downtown law firm I had retained, a firm with no connection to Arthur Vance or my family. The room was aggressively corporate, a long, polished mahogany table, black leather chairs, and a panoramic view of the city that felt sterile and impersonal. It was the perfect stage. I arrived early, laying out my documents with the precision of a surgeon arranging his instruments. On my left, the original LLC operating agreement and my father's death certificate. In the center, the amendments I had filed, the new bank statements under my sole signature, and the executed contracts. On my right, a single, pristine folder. The door opened, and Arthur Vance walked in first, a man whose expensive suit couldn't hide his predatory smile. Behind him was my mother. Seeing her in person for the first time in nearly a year was a physical jolt. She looked smaller than I remembered, but her presence filled the room. She was dressed in what I called her grieving matriarch uniform, a tailored black dress, a single strand of pearls, and an expression of strained, noble suffering. She refused to look at me, her gaze fixed on some point on the far wall, as if I were a distasteful piece of modern art. "Jordan," Vance began, taking a seat opposite me, all feigned warmth and professional courtesy. "I'm glad you finally agreed to meet. Your mother has been worried sick." I ignored him. My eyes locked on her. "Hello, Mother." Her chin lifted a fraction of an inch. "Jordan." Her voice was ice. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries." "Arthur," I said, turning my gaze to him. His smile faltered slightly. "You sent me a proposal. I'm here to give you my counteroffer." Vance chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "There isn't a counteroffer. Son, this is a simple matter. Your mother, as the primary heir and de facto manager of the estate since your father's passing." "De facto," I interrupted, my voice calm and level. I slid the first document across the table, the original LLC agreement. I had highlighted the section on succession, section 4.1.b. Upon the death or incapacitation of the managing member, Richard Smith, his role, title, and all associated powers shall pass immediately and irrevocably to the member Jordan Smith. My father, as you know, was a very precise man. Vance's eyes scanned the paragraph. The confidence in his posture began to deflate, like a slow leak in a tire. My mother shifted in her chair, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. She still didn't understand. She thought this was a petty squabble over paperwork. "This is highly irregular," Vance stammered, looking to my mother for guidance. "It's the foundational document of the company that owns nearly every asset you're trying to leverage," I said, my voice cutting through his bluster. "And as managing member for the past 5 years, a role I admittedly only recently chose to actively assume, I have a fiduciary duty to protect the interests of the company." I then pushed the second stack of papers forward. The filed amendments, the new bank account details showing the transfer of all liquid assets, which is why I've taken the liberty of restructuring Smith Family Holdings to better reflect the current market and shield it from mismanagement. My mother finally spoke, her voice laced with venom. "What have you done? I've secured our assets," I replied, my gaze unwavering. For example, the apartment building, the gables. It was being neglected. The capital improvements are decades overdue. So, I've sold it. A sharp gasp escaped her lips. Vance's face went pale. You sold the gables without consulting your mother? That's a flagrant violation, to whom my mother demanded, her eyes blazing. To a new entity, I said, sliding the final folder across the table. It's called the R. Smith Legacy Foundation. It's a nonprofit I established. Its charter is to provide affordable housing and maintain community properties. The foundation now owns the gables, free and clear. The superintendent, Mr. Henderson, has been appointed to the board, and I've allocated a significant budget for the repairs he's been begging you for years. The profits, in perpetuity, will be reinvested into the property and the community. It's what Dad would have wanted. Her face was a mask of disbelief. She'd seen the gables as her private cash machine. I had turned it into my father's memorial. The commercial lots downtown, I continued, my voice relentless. Sold. The proceeds have been moved into a diversified, low-risk portfolio under the sole management of the LLC's managing member, me. Vance was frantically shuffling through the papers, his lawyerly composure completely shattered. He looked up at me, aghast. But the house, the family home, surely that's in your mother's name. No, I said softly. It's not. Dad put the house into the LLC 10 years ago to protect it from liability. He was always planning ahead. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to an almost intimate whisper. For her alone. You changed the locks on a house you don't own. You have been living rent-free in a corporate asset, an asset owned by a company that I control. The color drained from her face. The mask of the powerful matriarch crumbled, revealing the terrified woman underneath. She looked at Vance, then at me, her mouth opening and closing silently. All the power she had so carefully cultivated, all the control she wielded through emotional leverage and symbolic gestures, had vanished. It was an illusion, and I had just turned on the lights. So here is my counteroffer, I said, standing up, my voice resonating with 5 years of unspoken truth. You will sign a lifetime lease agreement. You can live in the house for the rest of your life, for a nominal fee of $1 a year. The LLC will even continue to pay the property taxes and major upkeep, as it always has. In return, you will cede any and all claims. You will dissolve your agreement with Mr. Vance, and you will never, ever again mistake my independence for a weakness you can exploit. I slid a single piece of paper toward her. The lease agreement. You have built your kingdom on my father's foundation, I said, my voice no longer angry, just tired and clear. You forgot that he gave me the blueprints. And the deeds. Margaret did not sign the lease agreement that day. She simply stared at it, her face a blank canvas of shock. The pearls around her neck seemed to tighten, a pristine noose of her own making. Vance, utterly defeated, gathered his now useless papers, mumbled something about reviewing the documents, and guided my mother out of the room like a fragile porcelain doll that had been knocked from its shelf. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the sterile silence of the conference room, the city skyline stretching out before me, indifferent. There was no triumphal surge, no thrill of victory, just a profound, hollow quiet. The engineer in me had executed the plan flawlessly. The structure was sound. The systems were in my control. But the son in me felt like he had just demolished his own childhood home. Beam by painful beam. I had won. But I wondered what, precisely. The prize was, I didn't return to the Marriott. I drove back to the Gables. Frank Henderson was out front, sweeping the autumn leaves from the walkway. He saw my car and gave a small and hesitant wave. I got out and walked over, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filling the air. "It's done." "Frank," I said. He stopped sweeping and leaned on his broom, his old eyes studying my face. "How'd it go?" "The building is safe. It belongs to the foundation now. Your home is secure." A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, relief washing over his features. "He would be so proud of you, son. Your father. He would be so proud." His words were a balm, the first genuine warmth I had felt in days. We stood there for a few minutes, not saying much, just two men watching the afternoon light fade on a red brick building that meant something. I told him about the budget for the new boiler and the roof repairs. I asked him to put together a list of everything the building needed. For the first time, I felt the weight of my father's legacy not as a burden, but as a purpose. I wasn't just an owner, I was a custodian. A week later, a thick manila envelope arrived at the new P.O. box I had set up for the LLC. Inside was the lease agreement. Signed by my mother in a shaky, unfamiliar hand, there was no note, no letter, just the signature. Her capitulation was as silent and symbolic as her initial aggression had been. It was the quietest white flag ever waved. I haven't spoken to her since. I sent her a monthly statement from the LLC, a sterile, computer-generated document detailing the property taxes paid and any maintenance costs incurred on the house. It's a reminder, not a cruelty, a reminder of the new structure of our relationship, defined by legal lines rather than tangled heartstrings. I hear about her sometimes through a distant cousin. She's quiet. She keeps to her garden. The neighbors say she seems diminished. The queen, stripped of her authority, is just a woman alone in a very large house. There are days when a pang of guilt hits me, sharp and unexpected. I see a mother and son laughing in a park, and I feel a phantom limb ache for a relationship I never truly had. Did I have to be so ruthless? Could there have been another way? But then I remember the cold, blunt finality of that new lock. I remember the lawyer's email trying to disinherit me. She had set the terms of engagement. I had simply chosen a more effective weapon. My life is back in Boston, but it's different now. I left my corporate job. The profits from the new investment portfolio are more than enough to live on. My work now is the R. Smith Legacy Foundation. We're looking at another property, a rundown duplex that could be a good home for two families. I spend my days looking at blueprints, talking to contractors, and managing budgets. I'm building things. I'm fixing things. I'm using the tools my father gave me for their intended purpose. Last month, I drove back to Hartford. I didn't go to the house. I went to the cemetery. I stood before my father's grave. A simple granite headstone that read, Richard Smith, a good man, a great builder. I didn't have much to say. I just stood there, letting the quiet of the place settle over me. The war was over. The rage had cooled. The grief had found its proper place. I had taken the legacy he had built of concrete and steel, of contracts and clauses, and tried to honor the intent behind it all to provide a foundation, to create something that shelters, that supports, that lasts. She changed the locks to keep me out. In the end, what I did wasn't about changing the deeds to lock her in. It was about changing them to finally, truly, let myself go free, free from her control, free from the anger, free to be my father's son,